All right, coaches, we'll make a start. Firstly, thank you to our two presenters that have put their hand up this week to present in Liam and Peter. Obviously, very lucky to have them on board. I sort of say the same thing every week that I'm very excited, but it's sort of it's been a great initiative so far. We've got great feedback, and the registration numbers and the views of the clinic is really good. And hopefully just a great way for coaches to keep learning and staying connected during this really terrible period. So just some housekeeping. Make sure you're on mute, please. Case in point, it will change to your screen. So please keep your video on mute. Sorry, your sound on mute. If you have questions during the clinic, don't send them to everyone, just send them to me, which is Wyndham Basketball. So right at the bottom, just scroll down and send them to me, and I'll ask the presenters at the appropriate time. I'll just jump in with the questions or ask at the end of their presentation. So first up, we've got Liam Flynn, Coach Liam Flynn, currently assistant coach in Israel professionally in the top league there. He's been a pro coach in Australia, New Zealand, China, Germany, and also an NBA consultant to teams over there and NBA scout. Huge resume, Australian coach, flying the flag overseas, and doing some really good things. So I'll pass over to him for his presentation on trends from the European professional season.
Thanks, Reece. Thanks for the opportunity. It's always fun to talk basketball, and especially we've all got tons of time right now to exchange ideas. So hopefully there's something in here for everyone. And look, even if you see something and you like what you're doing better, that's a positive as well. I guess before I start, I started as an under 12 coach, under 10 coach many years ago. So I try and talk more in concepts and concepts that can apply all the way down to the lowest of age groups, all the way to the professional group. So again, I don't think it's going to be, there might be some topics that may not fit your team, but I think there's probably going to be more that will. And if you focus on the concepts rather than just like the set plays, hopefully there'll be something there for a under 14 girls team or a under 18 Division 4 boys team. So I'll share my screen and I'll get into it. So I guess the biggest thing I see, coaching in Europe, and I've been lucky to have been there for 8 seasons now, is that it's more about style of play and concepts, not so much the plays that you're running. So when we scout teams, we start with what style of play do they want to run? Are they a fast-paced team, or are they a team that plays in the half court? So for instance, when you play a team from France, it's mainly going to be more athletic players that want to get up and down. If you play a team from Greece, it's more going to be half court, smash mouth, more post-up plays. So it's important that you start with the style of play. Then after that, we focus on personnel. So what are the talents of the players? How are they trying to create advantages for those talents? So again, when we build the offense, that's how we go as well. We start with how we want to play, what players we have. And then the third thing we want to focus on is the actions. So for us, with our system, it was a lot of pick and roll basketball. So we wanted to find the pick and rolls that would show off the personnel that we had. And then finally, once we thought about all those 3 things, the style of play, the personnel, and the actions, then we finally got to what actual sets we were going to run. But that's always the 4th thing. And like I said, it's the same in scouting teams. We go style of play, personnel, actions, and then sets. When we talk about how it's played, the game is played in Europe on the offensive end, it's attacking with both the pass and off the bounce. So there is for sure some isolation play and some plays which you're trying to create space for players to play off the bounce. But there is probably far more offense where we try and create 2 on the ball or 2 on the roller. We're trying to pass the ball quickly. We're playing offense together to try and create advantages and then attack that way. The next concept I wanted to talk about was something that I ripped off the Miami Heat, and that's of triggers. So a trigger is something like an action that creates an advantage. And what we want to do is we want to be tricky so that the defense doesn't see our trigger or action coming. So I'm starting off with this clip here. This is FC Barcelona. You can see that here, this player here fakes the screen. He's being tricky. His trigger is a shooting action or a pin down. So against the better defense, you have to be able to mask your triggers or mask your actions. And ideally, you want to be running offense at high speed and with great timing. So if you can do things at high speed, it stops the defense from holding and bumping and disrupting your timing. And especially on the offensive end, offense is about rhythm. So if defense can disrupt your rhythm, then it's harder to create advantages. So I've got this clip here, I think it's a great example of high speed, like everything is a sprint. The timing of this ball screen comes, the flip of the ball screen comes just as the player is ready to come off. So there's no gaps for the defense to see the action coming and be ready to take away the trigger or the action. Same with this play here. Everything's a sprint. The final action is a pin in screen for this player here, these players here, but they mask it. They run it at full speed and the defense is taken by surprise. So that's the concepts of offense. So high speed, timing, and masking your actions. So I want to start with pick and roll play, and I'm going to spend half on offense and hopefully half on defense. So when we talk about pick and roll play, obviously you can run pick and rolls all over the court. The location matters. So you can run corner pick and rolls and side pick and rolls. The ones I'm going to focus on today are probably the ones that were of the highest frequency in Europe this year. So this is Valencia. It's a EuroLeague team. They're running flex action, but they want to get to their trigger or action is mid pick and roll. Okay, mid pick and roll. Second most, I guess, location for pick and roll play was what we call angle pick and rolls. And angle pick and rolls are what we consider dangerous because if you can, the ball is in what we call shrinking space here. But if you can get the defense to overcommit into this shrinking space and get the ball to this growing space over here, you can really attack defenders with a lot of space. So an angle pick and roll is on the slot, ball starts in the middle and goes to the outside. And then you can see all the space here for them to hit that short roller. Angle pick and roll. The other one is here, shake pick and rolls. Here it's called a slot pick and roll in this, but shake pick and roll where 4 are spread out. The screen is on the slot and the ball starts on the outside and comes to the middle. So this is what we call a shake pick and roll. And usually it's done to attack single side defenders. So what we're trying to do is create a single side tag here where we can create a closeout, attack the closeout, or create a space advantage to catch and shoot. The other, I guess, most frequent pick and roll play was empty corner pick and rolls. So you can see here Bayern Munich playing empty corner pick and roll here. So there's no one in the corner. So to me, they were the four most frequent actions, pick and roll locations. So the other thing we want to talk about is, sorry, there's one more here, step up pick and rolls. And this one here, there's a step up into a Spain action. So a stack pick and roll, step up. So we're screening up court. We're setting this stack pick and roll here, and it's allowing the dribbler to get to the basket. On top of the locations of the screens, we want to talk about what our alignment is when we play screen pick and roll basketball. So I've seen everything this season. I've seen 5 out, I've seen 4 out, and we ran 3 out alignment. So this is some 5 out alignment here. So the New Zealand team got to a lot of 5 out spacing here. Pick and pop action, pistol action, but they space the floor. And if you watch the Bucks play, that's a lot of 5 out alignment too. This one here is 3 out alignment into 4 out alignment. So you can see that we've got our stretch big lifting out, corners spread, and this was a shake pick and roll. So you've got the location of the screen, then you've got the alignment of the screen, of the team. This one here is mid pick and roll, but with 3 out 2 in spacing. So again, this is our team. This is how we played mostly. And we had a big playing what we called under the defense. So aggressively sealing to engage his defender. So the trigger or the action is the mid pick and roll, but it's with 3 out 2 in spacing. Once you figure out the alignments, the types of pick and rolls, then it's starting to think about which pairings you want in pick and rolls. So the traditional pairing with a lot of the ones that we just looked at was a big screening for a guard. This season, I saw a lot of different, I saw that mainly for sure, big screening for guards, but we also saw a lot of guard to guard screens. So this is us here. We're running a simple horn set, but what we want to get to is this guard to guard action because we want to attack this slow footed 3-man. So this is a 3-1 ball screen, or really a guard to guard ball screen, just so that we can create a switch, then we space into 4 out. So it's definitely, it's moved to different pairings, not just your traditional big screening for guard. This pairing here is us again, but this is where we've inverted and we have a big handling and a guard screening. So we had a really talented big who could handle the ball. So in this case, we have the guard screening for the big. A couple of other things to look at. You might run multiple screeners in the pick and roll. So this is Milan from the EuroLeague. They would run what we call a mash action. So it's a handoff, or it could be a throw and go, or a pass and follow. And then they have 2 players involved in the pick and roll. So there's all these different combinations. And again, I saw a lot of creativity. Again, thinking about pick and roll play, one of the most important things about pick and roll play is creating separation for the creator. Now, when I start teaching youth players pick and roll play, I generally do this when they have the ball already, and we work on our jab steps to create separation. We work on our bounce back dribbles and our in and out dribbles. But a lot of teams in Europe will use some kind of off-ball action to create the separation for the pick and roll. And it's really important to create that separation because it then forces the screener's defender to engage with the ball, and you get more advantages both on the ball and off the ball if you have separation. So this is an action, an off-ball action that was really popular this year, is what I call a deep sweep. So you can see how much separation is created between the defender and the pick and roll player, which then creates a 2 on the ball advantage, forces this nail defender to help out on the roller and creates that open shot. But it all started with the separation. There's not just separation with the pick and roll creator. We want to create separation for the screener as well. And one way of doing that is what we call delay screens. So a guard screening for a big. So this is Zalgiris here in the EuroLeague. Delay screen. We see the dribbler looking like he's going to refuse it to create the separation. But now because there's separation between the screener and his man, he's off balance. He doesn't see the Spain action coming behind him, and we open up for that wide open shot. So we can create separation with the creator, and we can create separation with the pick and roll, with the screener. Here's another example. We're looking at FS again from the EuroLeague. Pick the picker action, high speed into pistol action, into the final trigger, which is that slot pick and roll. So they've run all this action at high speed to get the separation they needed to have the pick and roll creators defender have to chase over, creating a driving lane, and we have a clear out screen here by the big.
Hey, Coach.
Yes.
Would you mind just maybe minimize? Are you in full screen on your sports code? Maybe minimize. It's just coming through a little bit choppy, and it sort of worked for us last week. So,
okay.
As if you go not on full screen, it might.
How's that?
Go a little bit bigger. Yeah, that's just play that for a sec.
1 second. Let me just turn down the sound. How's that?
It's a bit better. Yeah.
Okay, let me try. It's going to be too small.
No, that's okay. Yeah, go with what it was. Sorry about that. Yeah.
That's all right. On top of the, we've talked about creating separation for the creator. We've talked about creating separation for the screener. So that all happens prior to the screen. You also need to consider what's going to happen after the pick and roll. So in this action that's coming up here, we're getting into the pick and roll, and then we're going to look at some hammer action or some fade action after the pick and roll. All right, now it's an air ball shot here, but it creates a wide open 3. So you need to consider about what happens prior and what happens after the pick and roll. What does the play flow into next? So when we talk about shooting actions next, where you put the shooting action, where the cutter ends up, that's probably where you're going to end up playing pick and rolls from. So you've got to keep thinking about what happens next. If we don't create an advantage from the pick and roll, what does it flow into next? What's the action after the trigger? As well as all the pick and rolls that we've been talking about, I think the most important thing when teaching pick and roll play, you don't need a lot of plays. You just need to know what you're doing against every coverage. So for instance, when teams aggressively blitz the pick and roll or hard show, you need to know how you're attacking that. So in this case here, they look to refuse the screen against the show and drive away from it. In this case here, it's a touch and go and try and throw it over the top. So it's different options against the same coverage. And we taught our players like multiple reads against the coverage, but we knew what we were doing. And it really, when we were preparing for a team that week, when we were doing our plays, we would make sure that our our defense was playing the opponent's defense so that we could see the reads we were going to see on the weekend. This is another one here. So this is pick and roll play against more of a drop coverage. So you can see the defender is back. So instead of short rolls and slips and getting in behind the defense, it's more hit and hold. So the alignment is 3 out, 2 in. The trigger is a shake, pick and roll. And the coverage is drop coverage. So against that, we screen, we hit, and we hold. And then that creates the 2 on the ball advantage that we're looking at and the open cutting lane. Here is 4 out alignment, angle, pick and roll, switch. We've got to know what we're doing against the switch. And in this case, this is a Spanish team, Estudiantes. They run a boomerang pass and they're trying to attack the inside advantage. That's their first look. The other thing you can do against, that I've seen a lot of this season, is just teams being tricky about whether they set a screen or they slip out. And that can be a good tactic for any coverage, especially switching coverages where teams are expecting a switch and they're preparing for it, and you can just slip out and create confusion, which is what we call an advantage, a confusion advantage. So in this one here, they use a veer, so it looks like it's going to be a screen, but at the last second they slip out, and you can see this defender pauses thinking that we might be in our pick and roll coverage, which creates an open driving lane for a basket. Okay, so again, going through our procedure, 4 out alignment, the action is a veer screen, and the advantage created is what we call a lane advantage for a layup. Okay, this is our team here. Now, this is almost 5 out spacing. The trigger is going to be an angle pick and roll, and the coverage is under. So the read is to shoot the 3 behind the screen. This one here, we've got more 4 out spacing. Defense goes, the trigger is a angle pick and roll, and the read is to rescreen. So again, you see like concepts. You can see that there's a sequence of how we build what we're trying to do. Again, talking about what happens after the action. This is a great clip of pre-pick and roll play, the pick and roll, and then something happening after the play. So this team is Lietkabelis. They're from Lithuania. They use a down screen to create separation for the creator. The spacing is 4 out spacing. The trigger is stack pick and roll. So, sorry, it's a mid pick and roll, but with a stacked finish. So you can see pre-pick and roll, the pick and roll, and then what they did afterwards. Same here again. Pre the pick and roll, stagger action from Real Madrid. The trigger is mid pick and roll. And after the pick and roll, they're going to use this 45 cut. So again, things, actions link from one to another seamlessly at high speed, and they keep the defense under pressure. This is probably my favorite action. Sorry, I'm going into shooting actions now. So that's the pick and roll stuff. So Reese, is there any pick and roll questions you want to tidy up before we go into the shooting actions?
Just one with some teaching points on the veer screen.
Okay.
Anything is sort of, any key teaching points there?
Well, the main thing about the veer is that you've got to be tricky. So if you slip out every time, then the defense gets used to it and they start climbing into the ball and they move the screener around. So the whole thing about the veers is sometimes you got to set them and sometimes you got to slip them. So that's the first thing. The second thing, it's got to be done at high speed. It's got to be a full sprint. We don't jump stop when we screen. It's got to be a sprint into a stride stop so that you stop in a split second before the dribble is ready to come off. And I would even do that in juniors. I'd wear the offensive fouls to start off with until we got our timing right. But it's all about being tricky and doing things at high speed. And you can run the veers with bigs or guards, guard-to-guard action or big-to-guard action.
Yep, awesome.
Okay, so I think pick and roll is obviously the most common action in offensive basketball in Europe. The next actions I wanted to talk about is shooting actions. So when we scout a team, we would generally break it down to pick and roll play, shooting actions, post-ups, and then cutting actions or special plays. So this would be the second category where teams would try to attack. And I think shooting actions are really useful if you've got a player that maybe hasn't been involved in the action enough. Maybe they're a player that's not a great ball handler, so can't create advantages for themselves with the ball. And so using a shooting action or an off-ball screen to get them open is something you want to build into your offensive repertoire. So this is our team here in the white, playing Champions League against a Turkish team. The guy at the ball is an elite catch and shoot player, played 4 years in the Euro League, and we were lucky enough to have him this year, one of the top three-point shooters in Champions League. So we used a lot of what we called veers. So we talked about these fake screens. This veer becomes a pin down. So it's a veer pin. Veer, pin. And that's a shooting action to get an elite player a catch and shoot opportunity. Now, shooting actions are also really good if a lot of times we would play guards or wings who are outstanding guarding the ball. But when you put them in off-ball actions, they would lose their player. Or if you put them in rip screens or back screens, they weren't good or they weren't physical or big enough to bump the cutters on rip screens. So we class this as shooting actions as well. So here you have a really creative team, Vector from Germany. So they run 3-out alignment. The action or the trigger is this rip screen. And here's the defender here who is a really good on-ball defender, but they use the rip screen with this big here. They surprise them at the last second to create that opportunity. Now, I also saw some really creative shooting actions like this one here, where it's not just big screening for guards. This one here, it's what we call that mash action, handoff on ball, and then a big screening for another big for a catch and shoot. And in a similar way, what we were talking about, where bigs are generally really good at guarding the low post, and they're really good at guarding, or the best bigs are good at guarding pick and rolls as the screener. Not a lot of them are comfortable chasing cutters off screening actions. So this might be another time where, especially here, we played this white team in Champions League. This is an elite big defender, but not a player who was comfortable chasing bigs running off screens. And you can see the switches late enough that it creates an open advantage. So what were the most common shooting actions this year? Definitely wide pin downs. So this is like flow. It's a wide action, so it's on the side, and it's a pin down. So a shooting action to get that shooter open. And I think that was the most frequent shooting actions in Europe this year, wide pin downs. It's a really difficult space on the floor to guard. It's in between. The screen should be somewhere between the 3-point line and the lane. It's just an awkward angle for the defender on the screener to choose whether to go over the top or underneath. If the big helps out on the wide pin down, it can open up slips to the basket too. Here's another shooting action. So this is a pin down. So we had a wide pin on the side. This is a pin down, so it's a big, small, and it's in the middle of the floor. Again, shooting action. This is a turnout. So we have the cutter starting in the paint. He's going to turn out or cut off this screen on the low post. And I started to see more flares as well. So this one here, Vector, the German team again. Again, this is a big to big flare. We've got a big who again is not comfortable, hasn't done a lot of guarding off ball cutters in shooting actions. So they put him in a flare screen and they create a wide open shot for their big. I did see staggered screens this year. Again, we can see this is Zalgiris, a Lithuanian EuroLeague team. They're masking their stagger with some preliminary down screen, dribble handoff. And then we've got a stagger screen for the shooter. He gets his move cut off, so he gets into a counter move and attacks the basket. And I also saw the mash action that we talked about before with pick and rolls. I also saw it with shooting action. So if you put the ball with the second big instead of the first, you can run mash action for a shooter. Couple more shooting actions. Some elevator screens. So we look at two screeners here. This was actually a really smart play. This is Holon, who are a Champions League team from Israel, playing against a triangle and two. Here's the triangle of defenders here. They used an elevator screen to shut the door and get their shooter a wide open look. Couple more. So what we're focusing on here is the action over on this side. This is what we call a gaggle. A gaggle is three players working together in like a staggered screen, but it's not a typical two big set the screen and the guard comes off. What we do a lot of is we bring the guard off the first screen. He switches spots and becomes a screener, and we bring someone else off the gaggle. So FC Barcelona do a really good job. They've got Nikola Mirotic, who played years in the NBA and is a really versatile big who can come off shooting actions. So they run this gaggle action. Curl, stagger, shooting action. Obviously, you can run shooting actions that are like the gaggle, that are multiple actions in a row. This one is your traditional pick-the-picker action. So someone screens and comes off a screen. And this is traditionally called Kansas action. So there's a rip screen, and then the screener comes off a flare. And this is a really common set, side out of bounds or short clock when a team needs a three-pointer, just like Olympiacos here. They run the Kansas action. They screen in the defender who's trying to switch out, and Davies gets a wide open look. Doesn't make it, but gets a wide open look. Here again, showing some combinations of some of the things we've looked at for shooting actions. This is a rip, so the back screen coming off into a dribble handoff. Rip, handoff. So two actions, close together, high speed, no gaps, done at perfect timing to create this space advantage for a wide open three. I've got a couple more to go on these shooting actions. This is a common one that a lot of us have all seen. This is hammer action. So hammer action is when you have penetration on one side and you're trying to get the help defense engaged with helping out on the ball, and you set a flare screen on the other side of the court for a shooter. So this is the New Zealand national team. They run some gets action to try and get this dribbler downhill. So here's the penetration part. Here's 2 hammer screens on the weak side, and they get the shooter wide open. Just lastly on screening, as you've probably seen in all of these, it is a lot of big screening for guards, but you can definitely still have guard screening for guards in off-ball actions. So I've got this play here. It's pretty similar play. It's us running the play first, and we run bigs screening for guards. And again, James Feldine gets a wide open 3. This is the Boomers running, very similar action, but it's guard screening for guards. So my point is you can be creative with who the screener is, who the cutter is. Again, as long as it's masked well and it's done at high speed, and that if it's against teams that have more conservative coverage, you really headhunt and hit bodies, that you can have all different kinds of alignments. You can have different combinations. Who's the big, who's the screener, who's the cutter. So that's the film I wanted to show. And I've left, I think, 7 minutes left now for any questions for anyone who wants to ask any.
Thanks, Liam. That was great. There's a couple coming in, so I'll try and filter through them. So the first one's on Scout. Obviously, like there's so much, different styles of play and so much, complicated sort of actions there. So in your Scouts, when you're preparing for potentially multiple games in a week, is it more focused on the opposition players, their strengths and just concepts, this pick and roll or this action, or is it their sets? What's sort of the balance there?
It's definitely more of the former. So again, I think you need to start off with a broad focus, and you need to think as a coach how the game needs to play out for you to win. So for instance, when we play Ike in Champions League, who are a Greek team who want to play slow, physical, half-court game, that's not our style of game. So if the game is played on those terms, it's going to be difficult for us to win. So we want to play at high pace. We want to be running our actions with high speed, with lots of creating separation for our creators and our screeners. So we start with that kind of macro level about how the game needs to play out. Then we start moving into, as I said before, that's kind of style of play, like how the game needs to play out. Then it's definitely personnel. We want to know the use. Well, we look at the numbers, like who has the most usage rate, who's going to affect the game more. And we also want to know about high variance players. So players who are maybe better at home than they are away. So if we're playing Ike in Athens and there's a player who's significantly better at home and on the road, we want to know about those high variance players. We obviously want to know about their main usage players and again, how he wants to feel comfortable and get his points. And then we go into actions. So for a team like we played Burgos from Spain, a lot of it was angle pick and roll. So we focused on our angle pick and roll defense, a lot of practice. And then finally we got to the sets that triggered the angle pick and rolls. So that was the fourth thing. We wanted to get all the other things right. And then finally it was what are the highest frequency sets that go to those triggers that we've really focused on.
Yep. Awesome, mate. How much time do you guys spend as a coaching staff in defining the language for the various actions? I mean, obviously, you had, you've come in as a new assistant. How much time do you spend defining those actions and across the team and all that?
Yeah. When I came in, I would say 2/3 of the language was in place. And what I helped with was just to systemize our language and then fill in the gaps. So that's what we did pretty much the first 3 weeks of practice was to get all our language in. We had it up on the board. We had every component of the game from transition offense, transition defense, half-court offense, half-court defense, shooting actions, pick and rolls. And we would write the terminology up And if we liked it, we would put a tick. If we go out on the court and try something and we just didn't like it, we'd cross it off and try something else. And yeah, it took 3 or 4 weeks. And then finally we got our language down. And it was really important because we had new players to the team at the start, and we brought in 3 players during the season that had to talk our language.
Yeah, awesome, mate. That's great. Bit more of a broad question, but what's the first thing you'd teach if you took over a new team?
I definitely start broad. I'd start concepts, start with our style of play. So, sometimes that term's difficult to define, but generally if you walked into a stadium and watched a team play a game of basketball, like what are the adjectives or what are the things that come to mind? What kind of pace? Are they aggressive? Are they containment? Are they a team that plays at high pace, slow pace, mixed pace? What kind of actions or triggers are most common? So you start broad. I think once you have your style of play, then you tinker to your personnel. So I know it's very popular for some people to say, oh, you should always just change your system to your players. I think that's really difficult. You need to have, as a coach, a style of play that you're comfortable with, but it's got to have enough variance that you can mold it to the personnel that you sign. So, for instance, we have a system in Jerusalem that we play 3 out, 2 in, and we play with 2 bigs. But when we have our stretch big on the floor, we play with more 4 out spacing. It's still our system, but we just tweak it a bit, that instead of our bigs playing under the defense, the 4th big plays more on the corners. So that's how I would do it. And then you start working on your language. So each component of the game, your teaching points for each component, the verbal cues of the language you're in, that's kind of the system that you would go through when you first take over a team.
Yep. Similar to, on the back of the question around terminology, how much does the different languages and backgrounds, obviously, your players are coming from, how much does that impact, and how do you guys sort of work around that?
It definitely has an effect. If you don't have a language, then the players will use their own, and then you're in trouble because, for instance, we called back screens rip screens, and every coach used it every time. Every scout, every time we were setting up a play and we said it's going to be a rip, no one ever said back screen. So even after a couple of weeks, when players had come from different systems, when maybe they called it a back screen, by the 2nd or 3rd week, they were calling it rips. So you as a coach need to set the tone with that. You need to be really disciplined with it. I had to use different terminology this year than I had used. But, that's what you do to make your system work better for your players.
What about the actual language barriers of different nationalities? Sorry, I wasn't clear enough on that. Yeah, that was a good response regardless.
I guess in the professional level, you're all speaking English. We had players from 7 different countries. We used English as the coaching driver. We had a Israeli coach that sometimes would switch to Israeli language or Hebrew when he wanted to make a point to the Israeli players. But at Division 1 level, in all countries, it would be English. The only difference has been when I've coached in China that time, we had an interpreter, and there you're at the mercy of what the interpreter understands from you and then what they say to the player. So that was very, very difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's a bunch more, but I'll just try and get 1 or 2 more if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So obviously a little bit unrelated to your topic, but how much do you see the usage of sort of the gather and zero step in the Israeli league and in the Champions League?
You know what? I don't know much about it at all. I've got to be honest. I've seen some great clips from Jared Hillier and his group down at Southern Peninsula, and I'm still trying to figure out it all.
I feel better now.
Yeah. So yeah, I've got to be honest. I don't know a lot about it. I know what I see called in games, and that's probably where I put my focus of what I teach our players. So I guess I've been fortunate it's been pretty consistent how refereeing, like traveling, is being called consistently in European leagues. So we have we've always said we want to get the ball down before the first foot touches the ground. And that's been pretty consistent. So I will for sure dig into the step zero, whatever you said. I need to know more about it is the answer.
Yeah. What, if any, sort of screening or pick and roll action would you suggest for sort of under 12s level? I mean, you've come from a very much Australian background, come through to the pro level now. What would you sort of suggest at that level? Would you teach screening, and if so, what?
Okay. I had this conversation with Ash and Nathan at the Vic High Performance. We had a chat the other day about it. And I think at under 12 level, the first thing you need to introduce is advantage basketball. So we need to create an advantage before we shoot, and we need to have spacing before we create an advantage. And then obviously what an advantage looks like, 2 on the ball, someone off balance, blah, blah, blah. But so when we talk about advantages with under 12s, when they have the ball, they're like, I know how to create an advantage. I just, dribble move, I get past my man and I score myself. The next phase is teaching under 12s that you can create advantages with someone else. So if I pass to my mate and I cut and I get the ball back, I've created an advantage with someone else. Or if there's 3 of us and the ball starts on one side and it's swung to the other side and a defender is off balance and I drive at him, then I've created an OBD, or an off balance defender, by playing with someone else. So that would be the next level of creating advantages with someone else. Now, pick and rolls are a trigger of playing advantage basketball with someone else, but you can't introduce it until they've got the concept of, I can play with others to create advantages. So I would start with just simple, 2 players, one at the elbow, and we play what is called a get, where I pass to you and I try and run back off you at speed and get it back and score. And it's kind of the precursor to pick and roll basketball, but it introduces into the kid's mind about playing with others. Now, of course, offense a lot of times breaks down into one player at the end has to create an advantage for themselves or make a shot, but it's so much easier when you play with others. So before you get to the actual trigger or the action of pick and roll play, you need to introduce those other concepts about playing with others and how much easier it is.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that, Coach. That was great. I just like to thank you, obviously, for doing that for us and giving up your time, volunteering your time. On a personal level, we've used Coach Flynn a lot over my 3.5 years here at Wyndham, Old Werribee, and for a variety of different things, including his coach bundles and different player and coach development initiatives, and everything he delivers is first class. So, and you did that again tonight, mate. So really appreciate you volunteering your time, and certainly recommend to people to follow Coach on Twitter and check out his stuff. And if you've got any questions, certainly ask him, because he's always open to helping out. So certainly recommend him from an association and club point of view.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, Reese. And just want to echo what Reese said about, if you have questions and you want to ask them offline, you can find my email on my website, or tweet at me, and I'm more than happy to talk basketball at any time. And we all have time now, so feel free to send them through. Like I said, I started as an under 10 coach, so I feel your pain. So I'm happy to help at any level. It doesn't matter what level you are, association, club coach. If you want to reach out, please feel free.
No, thanks so much, Coach. I'll now introduce our next presenter. Most people would be aware of Peter and his background, but I'll just touch on it quickly. He's the current Basketball Australia Director of High Performance Coach Development and Talent Identification, which is quite a long title, but I think I got it right. He also has been a State Director of Coaching for multiple states, the country, Northern Territory and Basketball New South Wales. Australian Opal's assistant coach with a World Championship winning team, I believe, from memory. I hope that's right. And also their first ever Australian under-17 women's head coach. So certainly a credentialed coach and world-renowned coach educator. So very appreciative to have you on tonight, Peter, and looking forward to your presentation on holistic coach development.
Thanks, Reese. A couple things before we start. I want to congratulate Wyndham Basketball and Reese in particular. I think over the journey already, there's been over 500 coaches benefit from other coaches sharing knowledge, and to provide it for free is outstanding. So everyone involved at Wyndham should be congratulated. It's a superb effort. I also want to acknowledge Liam. Liam's invested heavily in his coaching and is created a lot of knowledge for himself, and he's a willing sharer. I thought his presentation was outstanding. And even though he said we've all got plenty of time, to produce those 40 or 50, clips is a time-consuming thing. So, congratulations, Liam. That was phenomenal, and thanks for what you continue to do. Guys, we're going to talk a little bit about how you can develop yourself as a coach in your journey. So I'll just share my screen here. Hopefully my technology skills are at some sort of level. So the first thing that we want to define a little bit, and that you should give some thought about. I've got the thing here. What is a coach? But it's really how you define yourself as a coach. I just did a bit of a brain dump as I was preparing these slides about what I think a coach is. Not necessarily what they do, but what traits they should have, and what are some of the intrinsics that should be within all coaches. The first one's teacher, and I think all of you are into that, because you wouldn't be sitting on a Thursday night before Easter, watching a webinar if you weren't into learning the game and being able to teach it better. Obviously, a leader is crucial, and in this day and age of player engagement and player empowerment, and making sure that it's a collaborative approach, we can never lose sight that the coach is the leader. They're the CEO of that team. Doesn't matter if it's the under-12 girls at Forestville or the under-20 boys at Melton. You're the CEO of that team, and your leadership and your approach to it's going to be important. One of my favourite sayings, and from one of my favourite movies, Remember the Titans, attitude reflects leadership. And, it's interesting when I talk to coaches, I say, who do you coach? And they say, oh, I just coach the under 14 girls at Dandenong. First thing I say is lose the just. They say, what do you mean? Well, I asked you who you coached, and you said you just coach them. Whatever team you're coaching, that's your world. If you're lucky enough to be coaching professionally in Europe, great. If you're coaching a youth team in regional Victoria, great. You're not just coaching, you're the leader, you're doing something really worthwhile. You should be a student of the game, of course. And isn't it exciting at the moment, even though we're going through a really difficult time, that we've got so many people investing in their knowledge base. This is my third Zoom virtual clinic this week. I know that last count today, I think there's been 13 different virtual clinics this week across all levels of the sport. So Australian basketball is in good shape because we've got a lot of good students of the game. You need to be a mentor. And you might think, well, a leader and a mentor is the same thing. No, they're not. I'm big on all of us playing a role as mentors and being active mentors, seeking that out. People aren't going to come to you as a coach and ask you to be their mentor necessarily. You've got to put yourself out there to make sure that people know that you're willing to help and you're willing to share your experiences, and work collaboratively to develop them. Supporter. Well, what do I mean by supporter? Well, right now you guys are being a supporter. You're supporting Wyndham, you're supporting your club, your association, and you're supporting those around you. And that's never been more important than it is now. You know, I did a clinic last night for a school in Sydney, and the topic was, you know, how do we support our athletes now? How do we engage them? How do we make sure that they still feel valued? That's the role of the supporter within the coach. Critical friend is a big one, and there is a difference between being a mentor and being a critical friend. You know, are you brave enough as a coach to share your opinions with a colleague and risk maybe upsetting them somewhat or challenging their thinking and trying to stretch them out of their comfort zone? So I think every coach has a role to be a critical friend, but I think also every coach needs to accept when someone's trying to be a critical friend. Often mentors are very positive, very nurturing, very encouraging, as they should be. Sometimes we need that person to say, yeah, look, you know, right now, I think you're on the Broadmeadows tram to Toorak. Sorry for those non-Victorians that didn't get that gag. And you need to be a trusted advisor, and this is more than ever. You know, there's a lot of stresses on young people, and I'm not just talking about now with COVID. I'm talking about how fast life moves, and how fast it changes. So you need to find the energy, and you need to find the time to play that role as a trusted advisor, not only for your players, but if you're fortunate enough to have assistant coaches and support staff, you know, that's a really important role. So I just want everyone to give some thought about how they rate themselves out of 10 for each of those 7 things. You know, and it's just a bit of time for self-reflection. How am I as a teacher? You know, what do you rate yourself highly on? And if you spend some time in thought on that, it'll identify what areas you think you need to develop and improve and seek some knowledge on. Now we move to skills and traits for coaches. And the first one is the single most important trait for any coach is a high level of empathy. You need to put yourself in the shoes of the players. You need to put yourself in the shoes of your assistant coaches and your support staff. And at times you even need to put yourself in the shoes of management and hierarchy and leadership within your association or your club. If you do that, now you've got a real chance to build worthwhile relationships. You can't establish worthwhile relationships, and you certainly can't maintain them without a high level of empathy. Technical knowledge and expertise is an obvious one. But again, I'd encourage you with all these dot points just to give yourself a score out of 10 and just do some self-reflection about where you think you are in some of these areas. Obviously, we just sat through a clinic with someone who's got outstanding technical knowledge, you know, both in terms of technical knowledge of the game, but also how to share the game and prepare information, you know, using sports code and IT systems. So how do you rate in that? And that's linked to, again, what I just said with Liam, ability to share and impart that knowledge. I was talking to someone earlier today, and I described myself as a bad former journalist. That was my profession before I moved into coaching. And the good thing about it, as bad as I was, it allows me to be sound in the written word. It allows me to document my thought process and to share information in the written word. And I think that's really, really important. Now, it's more about video. It's more about visual. So how is your ability to share and impart the knowledge that you're seeking and you're gaining all the time? Are you a two-way communicator? We'll go through a little task here. I'm sure everyone's got note paper with them. I want you to give yourself a score out of 10 for listening. So 10 being you're the best listener in the history of listening. 1 means you don't listen at all ever. After you've done that, I want you to give the score that you think your partner or assistant coach or closest friend would rank you for listening. And the third score I want you to give yourself is what you think your players would rate you as a listener, score out of 10. Now, if you've got the same 3 numbers, you're probably a good listener and you're probably doing a heck of a job, unless those numbers are all 1. But it's a good self-reflection tool. How do I listen? Do I listen? Am I open to new information? Do I foster collaboration? Do I engender trust that people want to share their thoughts and share information and share ideas? I think that's crucial. And just keeping a check on just how you do listen and how you absorb that information is really powerful. You need to be a motivator. In the days of fire and brimstone, motivation was everything. The rousing pre-game speeches, the rousing quarter time or timeout speeches. And, I always equate to, AFL football in the 70s, the great Tom Hafey, don't think, do, the great Ron Barassi, handball, 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 handball. Those great orations that people claim helped those teams win premierships and wins games. Well, we know now they really didn't. That sort of motivation, the fire and brimstone, it doesn't necessarily work with the modern player, but that doesn't mean we don't have a role to motivate. How do we motivate? Well, I think the best way to motivate is to hold people to account. If you're willing to hold your players to account, hold your staff to account, even hold your management to account, that's motivating, because there's a level of trust there that you feel confident enough to hold those people to account. You feel confident enough that they're going to do that back. That can be a motivating factor. But we also know now that motivation is very individual. There's a photo there on the slide of Josh Giddey, who's about to start on his NBL journey, and obviously a talented guy. He's his father's son. He's a very calm, measured, laid-back individual. So he's not going to respond to the fire and brimstone. You've got to appeal to his intellect. So as a motivator now, it's not just a matter of banging the desk and rah, rah, rah. It's really establishing relationships and making sure you know what makes your players tick. This is a big one for basketball coaches. Are you a lateral thinker? And I think we go through a cycle as coaches. We start coaching, and as Liam said, he started with the under 12s, and most of us do start at that level. And initially, we're really lateral thinkers because we don't know anything. So we want people to share. We want to take ideas. We're open to all ideas. Then we gain the dangerous thing of knowledge. All of a sudden, we start to build our philosophy, and we start to get really strong beliefs in how we approach the game. And at the bottom of that circle is when we think we know it all. When we're not open to new information, we're not a lateral thinker. We think we've invested heavily in our philosophy, that we're very confident in how the game should be played. As we get older, and I can comment on being older because I'm a dinosaur, you start to become more of a lateral thinker. I know it sounds funny, but you start to see some different things and go, you know what? I wish I knew that 10 years ago, or I wish I was open to that 10 years ago. So the importance of being a lateral thinker, which is linked to being patient. Often we don't allow new ideas as a coach because we're not patient enough. We just want to move on. We want to get to the next thing. We want to get to the point. And we need to have that ability to be patient, to absorb information, to think about it, and to see how that can fit our philosophy. And if it doesn't, great. But if you don't apply patience to that learning, you're going to get stuck in the same cycle. And I think humour is really, really important. You know, obviously it needs to be well placed, but I think humour can be really, really crucial in times of high stress. And I think that I think humour also provides the players with an understanding that you can be vulnerable, that you're not this person that thinks they know everything. It can blur the lines with hierarchy, and I think that's a good thing. You don't want, I'm the coach, I know everything. The players, you just do as you're told. You know, that sort of coaching went out with flared pants. This is a saying that I've used for about 10 years, and I heard it from a local football coach back in the Riverina where I grew up. And he spoke to me about think, learn, and reassess. The great thought process for coaches to get better. You know, think, that's an obvious one. We do that all the time. We spend a lot of time in thought about the game. And because of that, we learn. And the most exciting thing for me in my job here with Basketball Australia is we've got a real passion for sharing information, and we've got thousands and thousands of coaches that want to learn. So I think we do a great job on the first two. We spend time in thought. We're really thoughtful. We apply intellect to what we're doing. We're serious about that side of it. We're great learners, whether it's coaches' courses, whether it's clinics, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Twitter, which I think is a phenomenal learning environment. You know, we're invested in that. The third one is the most challenging for coaches, and that's to reassess. You know, we can get stuck in a rut, and again, it's that idea of being a lateral thinker. For 20 years, I didn't play zone because my mentors didn't play zone. That zone was the devil's handiwork. Just didn't play zone. And needless to say, I'm now a retired coach because I didn't win enough games to keep any jobs. So now I just pretend I know what I'm talking about. But it was my inability to reassess that created issues for me in the competitive environment. You know, you can call it stubbornness, but you've got to be open to new ideas. And that's where our European counterparts are ahead of us. You know, they're very creative and lateral thinkers, and they'll reassess. They'll try different things. You know, the great coaches like Pesic and Pablo Lasso, they're doing different things now than they were doing 5 years ago. Obviously, Mike Krzyzewski has reinvented himself at Duke multiple times in his 35-year journey. How are you at reassessing? How are you at saying, yeah, you know what, I'm going to try that? As you reflect on your skill set, what are the technical skills you need to improve? You know, and when I say technical, I don't mean video. I mean, how good a teacher are you of skill? How good a teacher are you of concept? And how good a teacher are you of tactic? Liam just took us through a series of tactical situations. In other words, the whole, you know, but it was all predicated on high-level skill and high-level concept. So if you define your coaching, both sides of the ball, offense and defense, to skill, concept, and tactical, again, as a self-reflection piece, give yourself a score out of 10 for each of those areas. And the value of self-reflection, that you don't need to be embarrassed. The one person that's always going to tell you the truth is you. So, you know, while you'll have mentors and while you'll have critical friends, the single most important person for you as you reflect and you want to improve your coaching is yourself. And I think it's really, really powerful to just score yourself in some of these areas. It doesn't mean that you have to beat yourself up, and we know coaches do that far too often, right? But it just gives you a starting point. It gives you a basis to review, and it gives you a basis to move forward. What are the soft skills you need to develop? And it's really a poor term, isn't it? Soft skills. You know, your communication, your empathy, your leadership, your ability to establish and maintain relationships. You know, again, dot down 4 or 5 of the soft skills, quote unquote. Just give yourself a score out of that. It's a great self-reflection piece. And, you know, you can come back to that in 3 months and see if you would score it a little bit differently. Because we expect the players to continually improve their skill set. We expect the players to have a growth mindset. We expect them to continually add things in the off season. If we don't spend some time in self-reflection, it's almost going to be impossible for us to drive our own improvement. Are you moving with the times? And this is back to the reassess. It's interesting listening to some of the language that Liam used, and that I hear when I talk to European colleagues and even guys in North America. You know, I spoke to a 72-year-old coach earlier in the week, and he used a term I'd never heard before for the Spanish pick and roll. You know, and I asked him, I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he told me. I said, "Oh yeah, we would call that Spanish pick and roll." But here's a guy who's 72 years old that's been either playing or coaching professionally for 50 years, and he's using new terminology, and he's staying relevant. So I think it's important. While we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and not everything new is great and not everything old is bad, but just reflect on: are you moving with the times? The game is a lot different now. You know, I'm a disciple of the secondary break, the Carolina break, and it's important that I look at that and think, okay, how does that fit the modern game? What can we do in that structure that's been worked so well for so long and tried and true? But how can we tweak it to be more effective in the way the game's being played now? You know, we spoke to you about how are you as a listener and a learner, and we scored ourselves with that. And one of the big things that we need to talk about is innovation. How innovative are you as a coach? And this speaks to the creativity. You know, the European coaches are creative. They reinvent themselves. They reinvent the way they teach. They reinvent the way they play. And this is one of my favorite sayings, and anyone that's been around me has probably heard me quote this many times. You know, a great definition of innovation came from Gary Pert, the great fullback from Fitzroy, and of course the wonderful Collingwood Football Club. When is the last time you did something for the first time? And he presented that at a clinic that I was at. And I think it's a great definition for high performance environments, but I think it's also a great definition for coaches. Just spend some time in reflection. When's the last time you did something for the first time within your coaching? Are you keeping it fresh? Are you keeping your mind open to new ideas? And I think that's a really powerful tool. So skill set, what have you got to develop? How's your vocabulary? And basketball is a game of jargon. It's a game of language. You know, I think it's important to spend some time in growing your vocabulary, becoming a better orator and better communicator. The greatest coaches of all have got high-level vocabulary, and they control the way that they present information verbally really well. It's funny when you look at Greg Popovich interviewed at quarter and three-quarter time, and it's the tried and true one-word answers and whatever else. And closer to home, we have Wayne Bennett who does the same. But if you go behind closed doors, they're two of the brightest, most articulate people you'll ever come across. Now, not everyone's a natural orator. Not everyone is comfortable standing in front of even a playing group and expressing their thoughts. Well, we're coaches. If we can't do that, it's going to be a really struggle. We can have the best technical, conceptual, and tactical skills in the world, but if we can't get that message across succinctly and using appropriate language, we're going to be in problems. So think about your tone, think about the volume, your language. And when I say language, I don't mean how we used to coach at the Griffith Demons with colourful language. I mean, how do you describe things? How's your inflection? Are you able to maintain people's interest by use of inflection? And, just in general, how are you as an orator? How are you when you stand in front of the group? Someone said, well, how do you develop that? Well, funnily enough, if you want to develop your jumping ability, you go and jump. If you want to develop your ability to run fast, you try and run as fast and as often as you can. If you want to develop your vocabulary and your ability to stand in front of a group and be an orator, you need to practice it. And I think one of the best things coaches can do is present clinics. It doesn't have to be in front of 180 coaches at MSAC. It can be at your club level, it can be association, but step out of your comfort zone, because what presenting clinics does, it forces you to organize your thoughts, and it forces you to take those thoughts and package them in a way that you can present in an engaging way. We spoke about the written word. Can you document your thought process? Even though we live in the soundbite society and we live in the age of video and whatever, at some stage you're going to have to document what you think of the game. Interestingly, about 18 months ago, we ran a performance coach course as a pilot in Victoria, which is the formal level 3. Some wonderful coaches, national level coaches, Australian team coaches, pro coaches, and we asked them to write a 2-page document on their coaching philosophy. And almost all of the 18 participants said that was one of the most challenging parts of the course. Just trying to get their thoughts on paper in a succinct, readable way was a challenge. So that was a great learning for me, that not everyone is comfortable in that environment. This is a big one, particularly for those guys that are coaching professionally or have got designs on coaching professionally. Can you manage upwards? Are you comfortable talking to the CEO? Are you comfortable as a young coach having worthwhile conversation and engagement with the director of coaching? Are you comfortable approaching an NBL coach, and asking for help and sharing your opinion? So managing upwards and how you deal with management is going to be a big part. If you've got designs on being a pro coach, that's a skill set that you need to develop as well. The difficult conversation, we all have them, particularly those of us that coach junior basketball. We have those wonderful people called parents, and they'll challenge you because they want the best for their child. You want the best for their child as a player. So you're not too far from where you need to be, but you're going to have some difficult conversations. So the best way to do that is to practice those, not to try and initiate them. But I think as young coaches, we spend a lot of time trying to avoid them. Well, they don't get any easier. I'm 50 years old and I still have some angst and anxiety when I know I've got to have a difficult conversation, whether that's with a coach, a colleague, or a parent. So what's your skill set there and how are you developing that is really important. Recruitment of players, and this is at every level. One of the great sayings, coaching is recruiting, recruiting is coaching. You need to get talent. You need to acquire talent. Now everything's relative. where Liam has been coaching, they go and acquire the best talent from all around the world because that's their charter. If I'm coaching the under 14 girls at Wodonga, I've got to go and find the best 12 and 13-year-old basketball players and make sure they want to play and make sure they buy into my vision for them and vision for the team. So again, rank yourself and just give yourself a rate. How are you in the recruitment? Or are you just happy to coach whatever's put in front of you? Well, you might say, well, that's pretty much my environment. I just coach whoever's put in front of me. That's not much fun. Your ability to acquire talent is crucial. And I'll send the actual web number, the pod number to Reese, but the Focus 3 podcast with Tim Kite and Coach Urban Meyer, the one that was released this week, is on acquiring talent. And if you're in a situation where you can recruit and you've got an influence on who plays on your team, I would strongly encourage you to listen to that pod. It's Focus 3 with Tim Kite and Urban Meyer. And the last one is recruitment of staff. Can you sell your vision? Why are these people going to come and coach with you? Why are these people going to be inspired or motivated by what you say and by what you do and how you run your team and how you run your program? Because the acquiring talent is not just about players. It's about the talent on your bench. It's about the talent within your strength and conditioning, your medical staff, your support staff. Where talent is really, really important. Team manager. Are they highly organized? Do they get it? Do they understand your vision? Can they play a key role in being a conduit between the players and the coaching staff? So that's what I talk about with recruitment and acquisition of talent. How do you do that? You ask a lot of questions. You make a lot of phone calls. You have a lot of conversations, and you'll get a feel for it. But that's on you, and that's a skill set that I think's underrated with coaches at every level. And the last one, what's your point of difference? Everyone wants to coach a state team. Everyone wants to coach a national team. Everyone wants to be a pro coach. Everyone wants to move from an assistant to a head coach. What's your point of difference? Is it X's and O's? Are you a genius when it comes to, concept and tactic? Do you know pick and roll coverages inside out? Well, if that's you, make it you. Don't dial it in, make it you. Player development is a huge thing in the pro game now, because teams at every level, whether it's Europe, Asia, or the US, or here in Australia, it's a lot cheaper to develop players than to purchase players. So there's a real niche in the player development space. But if that's going to be your point of difference, you better be great in the workouts. You better know your stuff. You better be in great shape, and you better run really specific sessions that the players engage in and value. Video and scouting is another big point of difference. If you can establish that, nearly everyone on this call can probably use Huddle to some level, can use Sports Code, or even are really good at iMovie. Right? What separates you? What's going to get you on that bench? What's going to get you in that film room? And can you give a coach something that's going to make a difference and it's going to make them look at you in a different light? Are you a numbers guy? Analytics is a big part of what we do. Are you great on the numbers? And I don't mean you're an accountant. I mean, can you provide the coaches with great information that's going to impact winning or losing? Strategy is another one. Relationships is obviously huge. Look at Luke Longley, what he did for the Boomers, and I'm certainly not taking away anything from Luke as a basketball coach. He certainly had a huge influence on the way they played off the off the post and all that terrific handoff and gets action. But he's the relationship king. People want to be around Luke. They want to ask him questions. They want to get his advice. That's his point of difference. You know, multiple NBA championship. Why is he on the bench in an Olympic Games? Because people value his ability to establish, maintain, grow, and develop relationships. Work ethic should be a given, but you know, are you the extra mile guy? You know, and then creativity. I think this is one that when I talk to pro coaches, and they're looking for, you know, assistant coaches, people to bring in, that they want something new. Is this person going to bring me anything new? So, you know, think about creativity. What can you bring that's different? And it's not gimmicky, but what can you bring that's different that might give your team, your coach, your players an advantage? So there's some of the things that I think that we should take, that we should spend some time in reflection on. When Reese asked me to put that together, I thought I'll just brain dump some things, and hopefully that'll stimulate a bit of thought. So, Reese, that's all I have, mate. I hope that was what you're after, and it also provided the coaches with a few things to consider.
Mate, it was absolutely brilliant. Certainly saw bits of the humour come through too. I was had some tears a couple of times with some of your comments. So certainly got to see that even in the coach education space. So that was really, really good. Got one question for you. Obviously, deep learner, deep thinker. How do you go about learning yourself? Is it verbally engaging with peers and mentors? So those conversations, is it reading? Is it are you watching clinics? And how much time roughly in a week do you dedicate to that?
Yeah, I mean, everyone does it different ways. And as you know, sometimes you don't have much time. So, you know, podcasts are big for me now. I have a 20-minute drive to work every day. That includes getting my coffee, or it did back in the good old days before we were all having instant coffee at home. But I have a 20-minute drive to work and 20-minute drive home. That's basically a podcast. So I try and do that every day. A lot of them are basketball, but a lot of them are business, leadership. You know, I'm sure a number of you listen to Michael Gervais. You know, that's fantastic learning. It's funny, my mum's an English teacher, and she used to hassle me to read through my teenage years, and I simply didn't. The only thing I read was the Inside Football, for those old ones that can remember that magazine. Now I try and read a book a month, and sometimes I've got two on the go. So I'll at the moment I've got one for enjoyment, which is John Feinstein, and another one which is Upstream by Dan Heath, which is about management and leadership and how you approach things. Probably the biggest thing is I ring mentors once a week, not the same mentor, but you know, if I get to Friday and go, oh, you know, I haven't spoken to anyone this week, I've got, you know, 4 or 5 guys that I really trust and that invested in me heavily. So once a week I ring them. Some of them here in Australia, and some of them are in the US. And I love that. And it's usually half an hour, 40 minutes, and I take notes. You know, it's not just a conversation. I take notes and try and formalize those a bit.
Yeah, no, that's great. Do you have any books you'd recommend?
Yeah, I just finished Upstream, as I said, by by Dan Heath. I think that's really good, and it's very different. It's not basketball. It's just leadership, decision making, and relationships. I think that's great. Obviously, Grit is fantastic. And you know, I like to just read a lot of from leaders. You know, I just not long ago finished a book. It was Lee Matthews' autobiography. And, you know, Lee Matthews is a 4-time premiership coach and arguably in the top 3 players of all time in his sport. So it's just interesting to get how those guys tick. But yeah, I'd really encourage that Dan Heath book. I think it's really thought provoking and quite lateral.
Great. Any suggestions on how to build a training environment that assists players to build creativity?
Yeah, small-sided games, advantage, disadvantage. I don't know if people have listened to the Basketball Immersion podcast. It's been out a couple of days with Jeff Van Gundy. If you haven't, do it as soon as you get off this clinic. And they talk about the ability, the importance of playing 5-on-5. I'm not so much along those lines, but certainly 3-on-3 and numerical advantage is a great one to develop creativity. And I think, one of the things I saw when I was in Manila, I was doing some work in the Philippines, and at youth level, that they trap most ball screens.
Mm.
So every ball screen's a trap or a blitz or a double tap, whatever you want to call it. And if there's 2 ball screens in the one possession, well, guess what? They trap both of them. And I asked them why they do it, because it just seemed crazy for me. And they said, no, we're trying to develop decision making, because it forces people to make decisions both sides of the ball.
Mm.
So the handler's got to handle that pressure, find the open player. The screener's got to find a way to extricate but be available.
Yep.
People have got to come to the ball defensively. How long do we stay in the trap? So it's one thing I brought back. I thought it's a really good idea, and it improves passing, it improves decision making, and that creative mindset.
No, that's awesome. You spoke about the importance of having a point of difference. Do you think there's a certain point of difference or a couple that are more important than others in coach development?
Well, it all depends. If it's about being the best coach you can possibly be, and you're not necessarily looking to move through the ranks, communication and relationships are the 2 best, and if you think about the best coaches in any sport that you want to think about, that you're interested in, they're high-level communicators and they've just got great relationships. So I think those 2 are really big. If I'm a young coach now, I'm getting great on the IT side of it. That's going to get me on a bench. That might get me as a volunteer on an NBL bench. Everyone can use Sportscode. Can you take it to somewhere different? And can you do something that a coach is going to look at you and go, hey, that's going to help us win. So as much as I'm a dinosaur and I'm bad on the video, if I was 25, I'd be investing a lot of time in those skills.
For sure. Were your mentors chosen, like targeted, or was it more organic?
Yeah, it was more organic. I was really, really fortunate. I moved around a lot when I was young, just trying to chase different basketball environments, and I really fell into some mentoring relationships. And I've always thought, because of that it should be organic, but not everyone's as fortunate as me, and not everyone stumbles on the quality of person like that I was able to do. As I've got older, I've realised that it doesn't have to always be organic. You can go and seek people, and go and ask them. I would have thought 10 years ago, I thought if someone come and asked me, hey, can you be my mentor? I would have given them a lecture about, hey, that's not how it works. It's got to be organic, and we've got to develop a relationship. But now I think it's different. I think you've got to go and seek it, and take some risks with that. But yeah, I was lucky. I just landed in some places that I don't know if people felt sorry for me, but they just started investing in me pretty early on. So,
yeah, no, that's awesome. What would you recommend for coaches developing in rural areas that have quite small programs?
Yeah, well, it's challenging. I'm from, my hometown was 15,000 people when I left. It's sort of grown a little bit now, but at some stage you may have to, if you really wanted to chase the dream, you may have to, move, not necessarily to the capital cities, but to centres where there's other opportunities.
Mm.
But the great thing about coaching in small regional areas is you're probably going to coach boys, girls, men, women. You're probably going to coach everything. I was my first ever coaching job was 19 years old, and I was assistant coach of the Griffith Demons State League team. And because I just happened to fall into it, and because I was a terrible player, they said, "Hey, it'd be better if you coached." And then so I'd coached grown men before I'd coached juniors. So those opportunities, you've got to try and flip it to a positive. And basketball's still basketball. If anything, you're going to get more reps. You're going to be able to work at your craft more.
Definitely. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Don't be so stubborn. And that's that to that point. Think, learn, and reassess. I just refused to reassess. And I thought I was following the lead of my head coaches and my mentors. I thought they were stoic, stubborn, deliberate, purposeful people, which they were. But now I know, speaking to them as a 50-year-old, they were creative and they did have the ability to reassess. I just didn't pick up on it. So, I don't think stubbornness is a real positive trait. And I think I mistook stubbornness with hard work, and the two have nothing to do with each other.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. That's good. Last one, and I think this will surprise some people. Who was the best player out of Griffith Demons?
Best player out of Griffith Demons? Well, we claim Mike Kelly because he was there for 6 months. So we claim. No, I think the best player from Griffith is a bloke by the name of Noel Heath, which no one would have heard of. Played a little bit with Newcastle Falcons and was an elite shooter. So I would say that it'd be Heathy. He's about he's a little older than me.
Nice. No, that's good. Peter, can't thank you enough. There's a lot of questions coming in, the coaches, even a lot of positive feedback already that I've received. So they really enjoyed that. Obviously, thank you to yourself and then Liam previously and all the coaches for joining in. I will just flag who we're going to have on next week, unless you've got something else to add, Pete.
No, mate, I just want to congratulate you again and the association. And I want to congratulate everyone that plugs into this stuff. It's really inspiring to have 200 plus coaches the night before Good Friday, wanting to learn. So well done to everyone involved, and thanks for what you're doing, Reece. It's unbelievable.
Thank you very much. So next week, does that come up for everyone? Yep. So next week, really lucky, same time, same place. We've got Mel Downer, who's currently working with Basketball New Zealand, but an Australian coach, very high-level Australian coach, and is going to present on tagging up defensive transition. So that'll be very interesting. And then we have the great man from down south, Mark Radford from Basketball Tasmania, presenting on basically how he's built that Tassie program up and the Tassie style of play. So two great presenters next week. So I'll get that information out to everyone, but hopefully you can all check in. But other than that, thank you to the presenters and to all the coaches for joining in. It was some really good stuff tonight. So thanks again.